economy is generating them.
Very Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard this from so many on the government benches, how good this Kickstarter scheme is. It has huge potential. But I keep saying to this Treasury bench, get their finger out, get on with it. It needs to be bigger, better. It must be linked to green skills and the real opportunities for turning young people into real, rolling their sleeves up, working in the community. And it could be backed by a windfall profit tax on the supermarkets or other people like that, or the gambling industry. Get on with it!
We are getting on with this. Actually, I would remind the honourable gentleman that when we compare it to the last Labour government's Future Jobs Fund, we've already comfortably exceeded the number of young people we've supported into work. Those are good, well-paying jobs in the sectors, which he rightly highlights are some of those of the future.
Kate to learn.
Number 12, please, Mr. Speaker.
Romance as something that I should follow.
Very Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, Jack Dromey has been in my life a very long time. I was a candidate in Taunton, an eminently winnable seat for our side, because I was a Transport and General Worker Union as well as a cooperator, this young man suddenly pitched up for a day to help me. So, we've known each other right back since 1974. And he was very suspicious of me at first. He was a university academic and, standing as a Labour candidate, he was really suspicious. He then found out I'd served an apprenticeship in a paint factory, ICI in Slough, and we became great friends. And ever since that day, we've worked on the manufacturing. We started the all-party manufacturing group. We've done wonderful campaigns together. He wasn't just a colleague or a comrade. He was a mate. I still come in here on a Thursday morning, and there's a Thursday morning club where when you're serious about politics, you're here on a Thursday to make the Leader of the House of life's misery. and we used to wonder, and Jack was there. I still see Jack there, Mr. Speaker, because he was so warm and generous, and he had a way of worming things out of you. He had a big family. I've got 4 children and 12 grandchildren. We used to compete. I know more about his family than you can ever believe, because he told me, how are you getting on? What stage are you at? And then I bored him, because everything he did was more exciting than what my family was doing. But, Mr. Speaker, the fact about Jack was his passion. I was a passionate, always, as chair of the Education and Skills Select Committee in the Children's School, on children's issues. He was passionate about our families and children, and he once said to me, Barry, if you're a Member of Parliament, you care about the job, you can't bear to think of a child in your constituency going to bed tonight with nothing in their tummy. He was compassionate, he was funny, he was wise. And I was with him with John Swift one night when we raised a glass of champagne and said, nothing but the best is good enough for the workers.
Absolutely right.
Jack, we love you, miss you, and we'll work to be even better than we are because of you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first met Jack as a young researcher.
Reversing this, we're the ones paying to reverse it, and Britain is proud of that.
Mr. Speaker, if we're going to really celebrate the 200th anniversary, it would be a good thing to start opening even more lines. And, of course, Mr. Speaker, you'll know not far from your constituency, the very first person to be killed on the railway was a Member of Parliament and Minister when they were trialling the rocket. So we should remember that. But, Mr. Speaker, if we're serious about marking that anniversary and bringing the old lines back into use, could he just look again at Yorkshire? We feel absolutely bereft that here is this opportunity with a commitment by the government to raise standards and level up, at a time when you've really smashed, this government has really smashed the really integrated plan for Yorkshire Rail.
Mr. Speaker, given that Huddersfield massively benefits from the £96 billion plan, the biggest ever plan that any government's ever announced into railway funding. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, bigger than the plan that President Biden just announced for railways in his package, even though they have a 5 times bigger population. But Huddersfield, I would have thought, would be celebrating in the streets.
So I'll definitely take this up for his constituent with the Secretary of State for Transport.
Boris Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm always pleased to listen to the Leader of the House. I like it better when he seems to be speaking for this House of Commons rather than as a sort of PR man for the Prime Minister. He said some very thoughtful things when he talked about police and the Metropolitan Police and police behaviour, about a few rotten apples can make such a difference in a culture of an institution. I hope he'll reflect on what he said and apply it to what's been going on in this House of Commons and in this government. But while he's thinking about that, can we have an early debate on the campaign by my great old friend, the member for Barking, has been raising in this House with no response? Why is it so much Russian money is swilling around in London? It's into the Conservative Party. It is everywhere, to a level where we're told now that we can't have sanctions against the Russians because there's so much Russian laundry money in this city.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, this government is made up of a collection of the finest, best apples you have ever seen anywhere in the world. They are the beauty of Bath, the Cox's Orange Pippins, the best, the finest that a costermonger could ever have on his stall. But to come to the point on Russian money, as I said earlier, that should a further Russian incursion into Ukraine happen, allies must enact swift retributive responses, including unprecedented sanctions. We have very tough laws against dirty money, and they are enforced.
I enjoyed meeting representatives from that sector on my recent visit. I'll be happy to meet with him and them to discuss the situation further.
Boris Sherman.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, we all know that the Chancellor is a fast-talking, slick operator who knows how to keep his head down when it's useful. But can I tell him that someone who's been in this House since 1979, he's the most incompetent Chancellor I've ever seen. And when children go to bed, he doesn't like it, Mr. Speaker, when children in my constituency go to bed with no food in their tummies, with no heat in their homes, what does he really think is the honourable position of a Chancellor who has just allowed one of his policies directly to be taken in fraud, £4.3 billion of fraud under his watch? Any other Chancellor that I've known would have come to the House today to resign.
Mr. Speaker, I'll let this government's record on economic policy speak for itself. It's a record I'm proud of. But I can provide the honourable gentleman with the assurance that I and the government remain committed to tackling fraud wherever we see it. He mentions a figure in £4.9 billion. As I mentioned to the House in orals on Tuesday, that estimate has already been reduced, Mr. Speaker, by a third, by £1.6 billion because of the actions we are taking. I won't go into them all now, but he should know that we will go after everyone wherever we can to recover that money for the taxpayer, and I'm confident that we will do a very good job.
That's what this government is doing.
Boris Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, I have known the Prime Minister a long time, and we've always got on quite well. He's not a wicked man, but he's a man that for years, in every job, has got by flying on the seat of his pants. He has a chaotic management style, and that is a question of character. And can I ask him really to look in the mirror, as he said this morning, and say, am I the man at this challenging time for our country, abroad, at home, in every sense? Has he the character to carry on and do that job properly?
No. Yes, Mr. Speaker, because quite frankly, I think it was absolutely indispensable that we had a strong number 10 that was able to take us out of the EU in spite of all the efforts of the party opposite to block it. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, a booster and a vaccine campaign that were led by number 10 that have made a dramatic difference, not just to the health of this country, but to the economic fortunes of this country. And whatever he says about me and my leadership, that is what we have delivered in the last year alone.
Scott Benson.